This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner. And thousands of years ago, cats were worshipped as gods. And apparently, cats have never forgotten this. My co-host is John Passon, and he once put super glue on a non-stick frying pan to see which one was lying. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you here from the States, specifically Utah.
And I'm John Passon. I am in Shanghai, China. Hi, everybody.
Well, John, it's that time of year. The seasons are shifting, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're heading, staring down the barrel of winter.
You know, the seasons shift in the Southern Hemisphere too, just the other way.
Yeah, so they're staring down the barrel of summer, right?
Wait, not the other way. Whatever.
Whichever. It's changing. The weather's changing, right?
The weather's changing.
Well, weather's changing, and we also have questions that are always coming in and changing, something like that. So today we wanted to go through some emails that we've had from many different listeners and answer some questions.
Oh, I think the reason you brought up the seasons is because we're going back and pulling emails from various seasons over the past year. Is that right?
Precisely. That's exactly what I was getting at, John.
Yeah, some of them date all the way back to April and even last winter. So let's get into them. It is past time to get into them.
And I'll just put this plug in real quick. If you have a listener question as we're going through this, go ahead and drop us an email. We're going to start answering your questions more regularly as opposed to, just taking a whole episode to answer everyone's. So if you got any question that you'd like to ask us, you can send it to feedback@mandarincompanion.com, or you can also visit mandarincompanion.com. We have a form there and you can submit a question for us, and we'll start answering these as we go on through the different episodes.
All right, so let's get into it today.
Okay, our first question, it comes from Amy Wang, and this one actually came from YouTube. Newsflash, we do have most of our episodes on YouTube. We are trying to get the newest ones continually updated. But anyway, this one came from Amy Wang. I wonder, for people who might be taking a break in Chinese class, what is the best way to keep up with their Chinese every day? John, what do you think?
Well, obviously you can read, right? You might have your Chinese Graded Readers by Mandarin Companion. You might have other reading material, but I think reading is one way to do it.
Definitely. And we're huge advocates of that, obviously, Mandarin Companion. But the thing about reading is that's something that you can control. You may not always be able to control who you're around or be able to interact with, but obviously you can choose to read in Chinese and ideally something at your level.
And if you've ever been to China, maybe you've downloaded WeChat and you have a few friends, you can also check their moments, 朋友圈, and maybe there's some interesting stories. Maybe you don't read everything, but you just pick out a few bits and pieces to read. That's another thing you could do.
And, on that note, even in WeChat, there are some functions where, you can find people nearby. There's, find friends, that type of stuff. And so there's ways to just, depending on where you're at, how many Chinese people there might be in your area, there are ways to try to find someone who hopefully speaks Chinese and connect with them.
Obviously, talking to Chinese friends is another great way to do it. That's not something that everyone can do. You might have some Chinese TV or movie options. You can do that too.
And with the advent of AI, there are a lot of new cool features. John, this is something that someone pointed out to me just recently. If you have ChatGPT, their app, you can speak to it and it'll speak back to you. And you can do that in Chinese as well. The problem with that is that sometimes it's not very leveled, if you will. Maybe it can be high level content. But this was cool. Someone showed me, John, is that it'll speak Chinglish to you. So you can say, all right, I want you to speak part English, part Chinese. And then if you speak back to it, use some English and then drop some Chinese words, or say a sentence in Chinese and then a sentence in English, and you say, I want you to reply back to me in that same way. It'll do that. So it used English and then Chinese. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
And of course, you can do what John does, and you can just, live in China and, have a Chinese spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. And
easy.
Live around Chinese colleagues. And that's pretty easy, right? No problem.
Yeah, so my Chinese practice tonight was just watching a TV show with my wife. It's this show about like couples that are thinking of getting a divorce and they're like talking about their relationship. So it's some nice high level Chinese for me that my wife likes to talk about.
Well, there you go, Amy. Hopefully that gives you a bunch of ideas. I think more than anything is just keep trying. There are opportunities and you have to find out what's going to work for you in your unique circumstances and environment.
Good luck and keep at it. 加油. All right, so here's a question from Shelly. She says, one thing I'd love for your podcast to address is how, when looking up words to use when writing an assignment, I can determine what's a formal word that is rarely used on a daily basis versus a commonly used word or expression. Oh, and this is a good question. I remember having this problem myself. It's tricky. And this is one of the issues that dictionary example sentences are supposed to help address. So if you look at a word and the meaning seems like what you want, don't stop there. Make sure you look at the sample sentences. Because if it's a really formal word, then the sentence should be formal. And if it's a really everyday word, then the sentence should be an everyday type sentence.
This is something, of course, I face once in a while, right? Looking up that word and there's, 3-4 options. Which is the more appropriate one? I think that's kind of also related. But, once in a while, you do look at Placo and they will identify a word that's more, it's like literary. That obviously can be an indicator.
Yeah, sometimes.
But not always, right?
Another thing you can do I don't know how much time you want to put into like one word, but you can do a search on the internet and the search results should give some kind of indication. You can also stick it into ChatGPT and it's usually pretty decent at giving you some indication about how formal or how frequently used a word is.
If it's an object, something physical or a descriptive word, yeah, again, Googling that and looking at the images that come up also can give you a good indication. So it gives you the idea of, looks like what you intended. Or that's something I'll do once in a while.
And then obviously the best way is to ask a Chinese person, but I'm assuming that that's not an option. So the other ones hopefully will be helpful.
But I think overall, some of these, we talk about, hey, is this formal or is it more commonly used? A lot of these things do come with experience in the language. I know that doesn't help you necessarily in the moment, but of course, keep on your studies, keep learning, keep practicing, and some of these things will become much more apparent as you move on in your language journey.
All right, what's next?
Okay, this next question comes from Kaylee Bosch. Again, another YouTube question. She made a comment on episode 110. It's how your personality changes in another language. She had a few comments, but she ends with this question. A huge misconception that I became victim to was not paying attention to grammar. There are still rules that need to be followed and understood. And I also like when we discuss immersion, I think being immersed in the culture and the language helps improve understanding and pronunciation. What programs or websites can I use in order to improve my grammar and reading? Well, John, I think you might have a good idea about this.
Well, I should say that it's always best if you can pick up the grammar and you can kind of absorb it, acquire it naturally. But if there are grammar questions and you really want to know how this one thing works, what's right and what's not right, then the Chinese Grammar Wiki should be helpful for most grammar patterns. It's got lots of examples too.
I'll definitely give a shout out to that. John, I know that's your thing, but really, guys, it's pretty comprehensive. Would that be the good word, John?
Yeah, I think that describes it.
So when I've had a question about grammar or how does this work, it's a good resource. You can go in there and it's got, so many different example sentences. And John, honestly, we should have potentially even given that plug for, that last question. How do you know something's formal or not? I guess there's some grammar structures which are used in more specific circumstances, but like the Grammar Wiki helps me understand like some of those aspects.
Yeah, especially if they're like more grammatical type particles. If they are formal, then it's going to point that out. So yeah, that can be helpful sometimes. But if you're just looking for exposure and you're just looking for more reading materials, I think maybe that's what she's asking, then you might not want to just read, example sentence after example sentence. So what other potential recommendations do we have?
So yeah, now we're getting to, reading. And I will preface this that, John and I'm speaking for you here, John, that we just don't necessarily advocate sitting down and studying grammar. It's better to get exposure to grammar. And as you need clarification, go through and study, look at some of these resources to help get more clarity about that. But as far as reading goes, obviously, we're huge advocates of Mandarin Companion. Also would put a plug in there for Imaginate Press. That Imaginate is like the number 8. Imaginate Press. They have all these great Chinese culture graded readers at HSK levels, and they're quite popular. Definitely online. There's like the Chairman's Bow. There's Do Chinese. There's a lot of others which have popped up. I even know the guys at Mandarin Blueprint. They have a lot of stuff in their coursework. There's the iChinese Reader. There's a lot of resources out there for reading materials in Chinese. Your mileage may vary, but there are a lot of things.
There are also a number of pop-ups like browser extensions or add-ons that can help you read native Chinese with pop-ups. That's not so great for beginners, but once you start getting to the intermediate and above levels, you might want to do some of that as well. Okay, so this next question is from Andre in the Czech Republic, and he asks, when you say that extensive reading is at 98 to 100% comprehension, what does it mean and how is it measured? Is it the number of characters that a reader doesn't know, or the words, or the sentences? I know that this is more of a theoretical question that I'm asking because knowing individual characters in a sentence does not guarantee being able to understand the meaning of the sentence. Okay, so getting to the question, 98% comprehension, what does that mean? So this comes from extensive reading in English. And in English, it's focused on words. So the core concept is words. So if you can read 9 words out of a sentence and there's one that you don't understand, then you've got 90%, right? So that's how it's calculated.
In Chinese, it gets a little more complicated, of course, because, there's a word and you don't know one of the characters. John, I think about this. Imagine if you're reading in English and you came across some word and you didn't know one of the letters in there. I imagine that's I never thought of it that way, but that's like what Chinese is like.
Yeah, Chinese makes it more complicated because sometimes there's a word you don't know, even though you know the characters. Sometimes you don't know the characters, but actually you know the word. Or sometimes you don't know the word or the characters. So it can be complicated in Chinese.
And sometimes you don't know what is a word, right? Or do these 2 characters go together? Or is it these 3? Or is it stand alone, right?
Yeah, so much fun to be had learning to read Chinese. We know. But it is percent comprehension with words. And so you have to be able to read the characters in order to be able to read the words. So we take all this into consideration when we design the books. But for you, I think to make it simple, just think of it as knowing the words in the sentences you're reading.
But I think it's important to understand that, the ideal extensive reading level is reading at a 98% level of comprehension. But this is not feasible in everything that you're reading. Even in a book or an article or whatever you're reading, that is going to go up and down as you go through whatever you're reading, because the variability inherent that's in the text, the topic changes, the plot develops or the whatever it's discussing. And so main thing here about the takeaway is that you do want to read at a high level of comprehension. I do recall there's one of these academic guys in the extensive reading sphere, and he kind of had this 5-finger rule. And he's kind of like, hey, if you're reading a book and you go through the full page and if you know all the words, then okay, maybe you should go to something harder. If you got 2 or 3 words on that page that you don't know, hey, that's probably right at your level. If you're hitting 5 or more, then you maybe should jump to something a little easier. I think that, again, that's a bit of a sliding scale when we get into Chinese, because this whole thing that we're just talking about here, characters versus words. But like definitely if you are reading a book and you're coming across like 10, 15 words on a page, or heck, 5, 6 word characters in a paragraph that you don't know, that's probably going to be a little bit hard for you, unless the surrounding content, the paragraphs and stuff, are much higher comprehension for you. So the main thing is pay attention to that reading speed. If you're having to stop all the time and look up things, that really bogs you down. You get into that reading pain stage, and you'll definitely learn better reading at a higher level of comprehension.
I have heard a few cases, though, where like someone starts to read at, say, level 1, And in the beginning, it's a little slow because there's some words they don't know. But because the story is kind of long and the words repeat, by design, even though it was kind of slow in the beginning, they can ramp up to a higher percentage of reading comprehension by just putting in a little extra effort. And, your comprehension is going to be a dynamic thing. Hopefully, it's going to keep increasing. So it's never going to be just like this static number throughout the book, even if the difficulty was constant throughout the book because you're learning, right? So, it's not an exact science, unfortunately, but just make sure that you're not putting yourself through torture.
Absolutely. And again, your interest in the material, whatever you're reading, can get you through some, a little more difficult content if it's more difficult for you. So, if you really want to read this, if there's something you're really interested in, that can take a lot of people through the hard times. Okay, our next question, it's a bit more of a comment. It comes from Grant Lacey. And Grant had sent us a very long email with a lot of experiences about his personal experiences and his relationship, with the podcast here. He's got a really interesting story about having a Chinese business partner and starting to learn Chinese.
But the thing that jumped out to me was at the end, he was just kind of commenting about a few things that he's noticed about the podcast. And he says, I feel like I know you a little bit. So as a hobby statistician, I am comfortable saying this. For the rants and raves, my gut instinct calculation is Jared comes in at 87% rants and John comes in at 92% raves. Thanks for everything.
I'm not entirely sure that's accurate.
Jared, you're so whiny. That's what he's saying.
We do have a podcast record that we can actually go back and audit that. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm not quite that positive, but I do prefer to be positive if, I don't have something I have to get off my chest. Okay, and this is a comment from Daniel on YouTube. Well, he asks, what period of Chinese history would you recommend to review to gain a comprehensive understanding of China?
That's a huge ball of wax.
No, actually, this is quite easy.
Modern really?
History. Yeah, just the past 100 years. Or maybe 120. I feel like starting with around 1900, if you understand, China's entrance into modernity, I don't know, however you want to call it. Because that's how I started with Chinese. And I have studied a little bit of Chinese history. It's not really my thing. But I feel like just knowing more about the 20th century is just really helpful to understanding modern China.
I will have to agree with that, John. In fact, that's about the only part of Chinese history that I have studied. And I think really understanding like the Mao era and the post-Mao era, obviously the Chinese revolution, all that stuff, really insightful for if you want to get a good understanding of like I think modern Chinese society and politics and geopolitical stuff.
Yeah, and obviously you like history, just keep adding to it. There's tons of great history resources. We're not the history guys, but I think it's definitely good to know something about the past 120 years of Chinese history.
Now, if you want to impress your Chinese friends, at least learn all the Chinese dynasties, right? If you know those, that's probably good. I don't know them, John. Do you?
What are you going to do? Just rattle them off?
Yeah, you at least know the order, right? I mean, they have to memorize all those in school.
Okay, I'm not sure that's going to result in a great conversation, but sure, if you want to.
If you just know them, I think, there's the Tang and the Song and the Wu, and I'm done. That's about all maybe I come with the other ones, but I don't know the orders. I'm going to
cut you off, Jared, because you're making us look bad. Let's go on to the next one.
Okay, our next question comes from Ella Anderson, and it comes from YouTube, and she asks this. One question I have for the both of you, do you think with how technologically advanced our society is becoming, the actual act of writing characters will become more obsolete? Well, John, what do you think?
Well, I've noticed just in my life here in China, I've been in China for 24 years, that it has become pretty obsolete already in my life. Now, I'm not Chinese, obviously, but yeah, I think we need to write by hand for fewer and fewer tasks, especially when you're not in school in China as a Chinese student.
I should note that this was in response to episode 79, why typing characters is better than handwriting. And we are of that general opinion. I will say, John, I'm not in China these days, but the only times I really needed to write down characters when I was living in China, even when I was back here this last summer, it's just filling out some government form. I swear that's about it. That's the only times I ever need to handwrite Chinese.
Yeah, actually, I used a little bit of Chinese handwriting when I came in to the airport like last month coming back from Italy. And I just wrote a few things in Chinese, but I didn't even have to. So, yeah, not too often.
Yeah. So will it become obsolete? I know predicting the future is always very difficult, but I think it already is less relevant than it was, say, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, of course. And I think handwriting in Chinese will become increasingly less relevant. Let's put it this way. I don't think it's going to become more relevant. And when we talk about writing, it's actually like handwriting characters. I just don't see how that's going to become increasingly more and more relevant in the future.
Yeah, and I think the question is actually targeted at Chinese people themselves, right? Not as a foreigner living in China. And so I think the average Chinese person does use Chinese more than someone like me, but it's not going to be more and more handwriting for sure. It's needed less and less.
So don't stress about it. I think once again, there's some people out there who just want to so focus on learning to handwrite everything. And just remember, handwriting is a skill in and of itself. It takes a lot of time and focus and dedication to learn to handwrite fluently. Okay, our last comment. It's actually a comment. This was a fun little fact. We had a recent email exchange with Adria, and I believe he's living in Taiwan. And he says in Taoyuan, there is a restaurant named Huama. And why is that significant to us?
So we have a breakthrough level book, which is called Huama.
And to be fair, it is a restaurant. What is this? This is like a tea house or something. And it's actually named Wu Huama. So I guess 5-flower horse, but it actually has a horse on it with Huama on it. Which is kind of indicative. If you read our graded reader, Huama, then you'll kind of get this a little better. And it was kind of fun. He sent us, I asked, hey, you got to send me a picture. And he did. And so we appreciate that. That was a fun one.
Yeah. And actually, there's a restaurant in Shanghai called Huama Tiantang. And it's a Yunnan Canteen, so Yunnanese restaurant. And I didn't realize that when we chose the name for the book. But, our Chinese team were also involved in the brainstorming of the names. And I don't know, maybe that was in their subconscious somewhere and came out.
And that restaurant, it's Lost Haven, right?
Lost Heaven.
Oh, Lost Heaven. I've been there. It's fantastic. It's a great place. I didn't realize that was a Chinese name.
Yeah, it's funny. All foreigners that come to China love that place. And apparently, most people that live in Shanghai don't really go there. They just take their friends there when they visit from out of town. And unfortunately, that place got hit hard by COVID because, tourism has taken a hit. I think it's still around, but it's not as successful as it once was.
It's a shadow of its former self.
But I think the food is still good.
Still good. It's like a lost heaven. If you make it to Shanghai, it's definitely a good place to go to.
And if you can go to Yunnan in southwest China, even better.
Oh, I've been there. Excellent stuff. Mushrooms. You got restaurants down there that have like mushrooms, like every dish has mushrooms in or something. I love mushrooms.
Which mushrooms you talking about, Jared?
Lots of mushrooms, many different kinds. I don't know, but they're
Can I
good.
take you to Lost Heaven?
Yeah, take me to Lost Heaven, John. You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. My name is Jared Turner, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series, and John Pasden, my co-host, is co-founder of Mandarin Companion and founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. If you love listening to this podcast, please subscribe and take a moment to text or share this episode with a friend or share it on social media. It helps us to reach more people on their Chinese language journey. You can leave us a review on iTunes or reach out to us at mandarincompanion.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find our Chinese Graded Reader Series on Amazon, iBooks, Google Play, or wherever you find your books. Apologies to John Cena, who just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Jasper Chua. And of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.